So this is chapter 9. It's called Building Support for the Proposed Change. And this is chapter 9 from our macro social workbook. And I couldn't figure out how to record on my PowerPoint. It wouldn't let me. So I'm just recording off of my iPad, and I'm just going to post this to YouTube, and I will give it to the professor, and he will share the link with you guys. So this is chapter 9, so let's get started. So before I get started, actually, I just want to talk about the learning outcomes from this chapter, which are write intervention hypothesis, identify and list participants within systems, and discuss methods used to build system capacity for change. So here we go. So an intervention hypothesis, so basically a definition. So one must figure out what is the intervention when talking about change strategy. So what exactly needs to be changed. So figure out what the problem is and the intervention involved to change it. So during the early phases of problem identification, many people involved in change efforts, which includes paid staff, service users, volunteers, and others, are eager to propose a specific intervention. So all those people have a right and the ability to propose what needs to be changed. So people are eager to propose immediate change and may be impatient with the idea of carefully thinking through alternatives. When an acceptable degree of consensus, general agreement, in quotes, is achieved about the nature of the problem, an intervention hypothesis can be proposed. So all these people have the right to make a change, write an intervention, and figure out what problem that's being identified needs to be changed. So the working intervention hypothesis is the next definition. So this is a statement or series of statements proposing a relationship between a specific intervention and a result or outcome. So within the framework, the statement should identify the target population, so who is it affecting, the proposed change, how it's going to change, and the results of the intervention. So figuring out what the intervention is, we'll see the results of what needs to be changed. So this makes a complete package that makes it clear the expected relationship between problem, intervention, and result. So this is an example of, this was from our book, it's about disabled teens, and this is for the working intervention hypothesis. So one was to increase physical activity and exercise for disabled teens, provide opportunities for education and development of marketable skills, pair with a mentor who has overcome a physical disability, and work with local employers to identify job slots. And once those plans are in place, the results are improved physical health, increased incidence of GED or equivalent, development of a positive identity as demonstrated by articulation of life and career goals, and also at least 50% increase of successful employment. So that's that. So the next part was about defining participants. So like who would it affect? So it is not unusual for the people involved to be a small core of committed individuals, possibly even close friends or colleagues who recognize a condition or problem and are concerned enough to take action. So anybody can really take action here. Building coalitions is important. So that's an alliance for combined action, especially a temporary alliance of political parties forming a government or of states. Having an alliance of people will include everyone, like I mentioned, that wants to be involved with change and taking action. So anybody can be involved when it comes to taking action and changing what needs to be changed, and anybody can be involved. So the next part was the definition of the initiator system, which is made up of individuals who first recognize that the problem exists, and those people initiate it and call attention to it. So the example I used here from the book was to promote safe sex practices. So these are people who would initiate it. So concerned citizens committed to change, community leaders, victims of HIV or AIDS, parents, high school counselors, Planned Parenthood staff, county health staff, and other. So these are the people who really say, like, okay, how do we want to promote safe sex practices in our area? So these would be people who would be mostly concerned about these issues. Like, let's take parents, for example. Parents obviously want to know how to promote safe sex practices for their kids and to maybe help spread HIV and AIDS. And then, of course, all these other people, like, for example, high school counselors, would like to know that as well. So maybe they can help out a student in need or in school who needs help. So that's that. Next was the client system. So this is made up of individuals who will become either direct or indirect beneficiaries of the change if it's implemented. They may desire the change, but not yet be actively involved in making it happen. So the two questions raised here are, who will be the primary beneficiaries of change, and who will be the secondary beneficiaries of change? So potential members of the change agent system. So these are the change agent systems in the community effort, again, to promote safe sex practices. So it would be the chair, teens, concerned citizens, county board member, other interested and committed community representatives, county staff person with good organizational skills, knowledge of HIV and AIDS with time available for the project, well known in the community who get others to support the effort, and someone who can interference and get the county to support the effort. So those are potential members of the change agent and systems. So the support system is next. So others who may be expected to support the change effort. So a catch-all system that refers to everyone in a larger community or organization who has an interest in the success of the proposed change. And here we're talking about secondary benefits and others with primary beneficiaries. Can be expected to be positively inclined towards change and be willing to be involved in supporting and advocating for the change if needed. So the next slide talks about those primary beneficiaries of safe sex practices. Again, I'm using the safe sex example from the book. And the secondary beneficiaries of safe sex practices. So let's look at the primary ones first. So all teens within the identified boundaries not knowledgeable about safe sex practices, selected high-risk teens within the identified boundaries, and all sexually active adults within the identified boundaries not knowledgeable about safe sex practices. And then the secondary ones are families of all who learn about safe sex practices, high school teachers, administration, and health providers, the entire countywide health provision system, and community leaders concerned about HIV and AIDS. So those are just examples of beneficiaries for the primary and secondary for our safe sex example from the book. So then it just continues and talks about communities of practice. So these are increasingly being used to engage groups and individuals in addressing common concerns or issues that come up, such as violence in the community or health disparities, particularly when problem solving is needed across locations, organizations, disciplines, or professions. So these are really people in the area who really say, like, these are common concerns that are coming up in our community and they need intervention and they need to be changed. People from other communities can join together and talk about similar concerns in their area, and also concerns that have been identified in other locations, maybe state or national groups dedicated to their resolution. So you may find out about other problems that exist around the world, and they are commonly known in other areas, and they may take place in your area. So the next part is controlling system. So that's the person or persons who have the power and the authority to approve the change and direct that be implemented. The person or group of individuals with the formally delegated authority to approve and order the implementation of the proposed change. But this controlling system is not necessarily the individual or group at the highest level of authority. So this is potential controlling system members of organizations, again, for our safe sex practice example. So this can be education of high school students, community education, distribution of literature, high school principal and possibly school board, station managers of TV and radio stations and newspaper editors, and county health director. So those are our potential controlling system members for our safe sex example. So next they talked about the host system. So the host system is the organization or unit with formally designated responsibility for the area to be addressed by the proposed change. The part of the organization or community that will provide auspices, I think that's how it says that, for administration of the intervention. So I gave a few examples of like a host system. So it would be like the City Department of Human Services, Neighborhood Services Division. The host system has one or more employees and our volunteers who will have a day-to-day responsibility of carrying out the change. The host will be a subunit of an organization that will be expected to implement a policy change or a new program or project. So that is our host system. And then I gave just a couple of examples of controlling, host, and implementing systems. So controlling would be like the school board, city council, state departments of social services, and corporate board of directors. The host system would be a particular school and its principal, police chief and department, county department of social services, or local hospital. And implementing teachers in the schools involved in the change, police officers involved in the change, social welfare workers involved in the change, hospital staff involved in the change. So those are just examples of those. So the next part is the target system. So the individual, group, structure, policy, or practice that needs to be changed for the primary beneficiaries to achieve the desired benefits. It is not always defined in simplest terms, like the book said, and that which must be changed for the intervention to be successful. So when it talked about target system, it addressed 3 questions, which are what change needs to take place, which is really important to figure out and distinguish what intervention needs to go into place to fix the problem. What individuals need to agree to change, so everybody in the community can say this needs to change, that needs to change, and what needs to be changed in order for the intervention to work successfully. So those are our 3 questions there. So the next term is action system. So made up of individuals from other systems who have an active role in planning the change and moving it toward implementation. The expanded planning and coordinating committee responsible for seeing the change effort through the completion. So action systems should include representatives from as many other systems as possible, essentially those systems that need a change if the relationship is not excessively adversarial or opposed. So these are the people who say, what action is going into place? Like, how are we going to change and come up with an intervention? Like, what is going to change? And we have to keep moving toward the implementation and figuring out, how we're going to get better results. So now this is just examining system capacity for change. So participants should be assessed for their readiness to support the proposed change. So key questions dealing with commitment to change. The 2 questions they raised were, what has the past experience with each of the systems participants with regard to organizational community change, and what levels of commitment to the proposed change and abilities to follow through are anticipated from each of the systems participants. So those are the 2 questions that were raised. So like what needs to be, like participants, like what do they think that the change needs to be and the abilities to follow it through with it. So like we can't just say like, okay, we're going to change this like right now. We have to do this. So we need to figure out like who has right abilities to make this move and make this change happen. So dialogue has been used to guide group decision making and community and organization practice. So dialogue can be used to generate new ways of thinking about the problem at hand, to recognize how political power changes individuals' ways of perceiving problems. And then the book said experimental knowledge is important here. And I Google searched experimental knowledge, and it said it means knowledge acquired through experience. So this is basically you gain knowledge by experiencing new things and experiencing new problems that come up. So then it talked about psychological contracts briefly. So the individual's beliefs and expectations about the obligations a group or organization has to them and they have to the group or organization. So there's always room for misinterpretation because these are based on perceptions. So people have different perceptions on certain things. So when change occurs, psychological contracts may appear to be violated because expectations may be perceived to shift. And then there was just a paragraph talking, I thought this was important, about the use of social media. So social media we obviously use all the time nowadays. So it talked a lot about virtual volunteers. So you can have people helping you through an intervention and through change by simply just like people who are off-site. So like this can be action team members using the internet, a computer, a tablet, a smartphone for internet connected devices. So they can take part in the task or take part-time in the task and help out through electronic devices. The use of social media is recommended for engaging volunteers and staff in change efforts. And it really said text messaging is a good way to keep everyone in the loop, which is really important because nowadays when we use technology and we're constantly messaging people through our phones and connecting with people through social media, this can be a really good way to keep everybody in the loop so that everyone kind of knows what's going on when it comes to dealing with this sort of change. So that's about the end of chapter 9. So I just did a brief summary. So planned change requires careful study and analysis before action is taken. There are a series of assessments that will help the change agent understand the positions of each of the systems on the proposed change. And then in caps, I just wrote basically what was said during this video and what we went over. So how to write an intervention hypothesis, what is the problem, how can we change it, and the intervention, what do we have to do to improve what's going on in a community. Identify a list of participants within systems, so who is involved with this problem, and discuss methods used to build systems capacity for change. So that's about it for chapter 9. I apologize. I was trying to breathe through my mouth because my nose is stuffed up. So I was trying to breathe and talk at the same time. So I apologize. But that was the end of chapter 9. And again, chapter 9 was building support for the proposed change. And it was kind of lengthy, but we got through most of it. So that is about it for chapter 9. And yeah, so I hope you enjoyed.